Shalom, Boker Tov. And this is a re-recording of Saturday's teaching, which I did, but apparently live stream knocked off half of the teaching. So I'm going to re-record it and give it to you with this beautiful background from Petra in Jordan, where we went in the year 2016. Okay, well, this is about the day or the hour. God, through Mashiach Yeshua, spoke to the Jewish people in many portions and in many ways. Hebrews 1 and 2, you know that. Relying upon known figures of speech, common expectations, and direct thoughts from Talmudic and Pharisaic teachings. Yeah, he used all those things. One of the most interesting Jewish figures of speech misunderstood by the church over the years concerns the phrase, "No one knows about the day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." So he's referring here in context to the home taking of his bride, the beginning of the Messianic era, and his millennial reign as King of Kings over all the earth. To understand the concept, we have to begin with its foundation. And the foundation is found in the annual Jewish Festival of Trumpets, or the rabbis like to call it Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, since they begin their new year on this day. But it's the first day of the 7th month of the year. God starts the calendar in the spring, in Aviv, or Nisan. A few themes linked to this Jewish festival are resurrection, repentance, kingship, coronation, and a marriage feast. Got to have food. Rosh Hashanah is not only the start of the day of the Lord, but is also the day of resurrection and rapture. It has to do with the moon and its 29 and a half day cycle of renewal. So in a period of slightly less than 30 days, the moon goes from darkness to light to darkness all over again. It's not a haphazard occurrence attributed to evolution or science. God planned it that way for many reasons, one being a picture of resurrection and renewal. With each cycle of nearly 30 days, the ancient rabbis understood that the moon was being reborn or born again. I think Yeshua capitalized on that concept when he spoke to that Pharisee we all know as Nakdimon, Nicodemus. I tell you the truth, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again. All right, so Nakdimon, or you like to call him Nicodemus, knew Yeshua was saying one's heart, the Hebrew word for heart is lev, must be renewed or born again like the moon. Hebrew word there is levanah, which is also symbolic of the marriage relationship between Israel and HaMashiach. Yeshua's lesson was clear. God was renewing his wedding contract. His marriage contract is called a ketubah in Hebrew. It's always read at a Jewish wedding. He's renewing his wedding contract with Israel. His contract was the Torah, by the way. Yeah, the moon is a picture of Israel and her Mashiach, her Messiah. Therefore, to be in the body of Mashiach, one has to have a change of heart and be born again. Well, perhaps Yeshua, in talking with Nakdimon, was also painting a word picture of a Gentile's conversion to Judaism through immersion, a process we refer to nowadays as becoming born again. It has its roots in the story of Naaman, the Syrian, who was reborn, he was born again, under the ministry of the prophet Elisha, back in 2 Kings 5. For purposes of conversion, in Deuteronomy 21, 11 through 14, Gentiles had their hair shaved off completely and nails clipped back. Then the convert entered a mikvah, an immersion pool, naked and alone. They immersed 7 times in the water, all the way down, and came out looking like a little baby. No, cute. This was a picture of leaving a pagan lifestyle and coming into a relationship with the one holy God of the Hebrews. Gentiles performing that ritual were called proselytes according to Acts 13:43. And the ones who didn't do that, but still hung around with the Jews, they were called God-fearers, according to Acts 10:22. Well, in Yeshua's day, the moon was so important that a Jewish festival was proclaimed at the beginning of every month. So it was like a Shabbat, a party day, a relaxed day, a rest day, a Shabbat. It's actually a Sabbath day. This was called the New Moon Festival. And in the Brit HaChadeshah, the renewed covenant, some of you call it the New Testament, Rabbi Shaul, or Paul, makes note of it. You know, he says in Colossians 2:16, even in the Tanakh, King David provoked King Saul over it in 1 Samuel 20, verse 5. In the coming millennium, the gate of the inner court of the temple, according to Ezekiel 46:1, the one facing east, shall be opened on the new moon. And finally, in the millennium, Isaiah 66:23 says all nations will celebrate the new moon festival every month. Yeah, it is obvious that in the millennium, God has no plans to do away with this system. So we're going to do it in the millennium. We've done it in the past. The Jewish people are doing it today. Why isn't everybody else doing it? Doesn't make sense to me. Don't know. Since it's so important, exactly what is a new moon? It is the opposite of a full moon, of course. Every month, the moon goes through a complete cycle of renewal we call Rosh Chodesh. The head. Rosh means head. Chodesh means renewal or new. The head or beginning of the renewed month. Remember that God established the ancient Jewish calendar because all the other nations surrounding Israel, well, they had a calendar worshiping the sun. They were all sun gods. God wanted his people to be different. Do you know if Jews are different today? Do you think they are? I think they are. I feel different than most people most of the time. He commanded them to keep track of time using the moon instead of the sun. The moon with its near 30-day cycle, 12 times a year. Well, that would be that, and then two more. On Rosh Chodesh, the moon always starts off with its disk being very dark to the naked eye. Over the course of 15 days, it gets brighter and brighter until it finally reaches a full white disk or full moon, so the werewolves can come out. Over the next 15 days, it becomes darker and darker and finally becomes invisible to the naked eye again. Ancient rabbis saw a great lesson in this. Just as the moon has no light of its own, but receives its light from the sun, so we too have no light of our own and must receive it from God. As the moon goes through the near 30-day cycle of dark to light to dark, so we need constant spiritual renewal and repentance. Like the moon, we too must be reborn or born again into HaMashiach and constantly renewed through repentance. So that's why God calls the moon a faithful witness in the sky, according to Psalm 89:37. Perhaps this is why we take communion over and over again. We renew ourselves. We immerse ourselves over and over again. You could immerse yourself as many times as you want. Jewish people do it every week. The Orthodox guys who are going to go to synagogue, they do it on Friday mornings. And women do it once a month after their monthly cycle. If the moon is so important to God, why do we pay so little attention to it? Perhaps because of our distractions with life and the pursuit of happiness. We have lost touch with God's faithful witness in the sky, but Yeshua and the people of his day never lost touch with it. And as I said before, not only was the new moon necessary for the Jewish calendar, it was also a monthly festival celebrated with a feast fit for a king. So when Yeshua said his famous words in Matthew 24:36, it had far-reaching implications. Here's the words of Yeshua that he said there, but I'm going to give them to you in three different translations. First one is the New King James Version. But of the day and the hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. and the King James Version, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And then finally the NIV, no one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Failing to think like Yeshua and taking phrases out of Jewish context will lead you to misunderstand what he's saying. For example, in many places of the Berit HaChadashah, Yeshua knew the future and talked about it openly. In one instance, he warned his Talmudim, his disciples, about their future, saying, "See, I have told you ahead of time." That's in Matthew 24:25. His context concerned the tribulation, the destruction of the temple, the rise of false messiahs, etc. If he knew the future in Matthew 24:25, and the context concerns the day of trouble, why suddenly would he speak as though he did not know the future in the same context just 11 verses later in Matthew 24:36? Was he confused, or was he making sense? Perfect sense in light of the customs of the Jews. Well, we'll find out here in a minute, won't we? Since our subject is the new moon and figures of speech, realize the phrase of that day and hour no man knows refers to the sanctification or setting apart of the new moon. Without this sanctification, the Jews had no way of determining God's appointed times. In Hebrew, we call that God's Moedim. 12 times a year, a new Jewish month, we call it Rosh Chodesh, right, was announced to the people. We have no system like it today. We today look at our calendars to determine the first day of the month. The Jews, however, looked to the moon. This system of chronology was given to the Jews to know precisely when the holy festivals, the Moedim, would fall. There are still 8 of them, 7 appointed times and the Shabbat. The moon was the faithful calendar or witness in the sky for the Jewish people, and 12 times a year was sanctified as the basis of the Jewish stellar calendar. Because the moon was so important for Jewish date setting, that the authorities in charge of announcing the new moon in Jerusalem took great care to ensure that the first day of the month was announced on time. To correctly announce the first day of the month established by the new moon was one of the Sanhedrin's greatest responsibilities. Sanhedrin was the holy high court of the Jewish people in Jerusalem. Had 72 members. They had to ensure that people knew when the first of the month began 12 times a year. Therefore, God said to the leaders of Israel, "These are the appointed times," Leviticus 23:4, "of the Lord, holy convocations which ye shall proclaim at the times appointed for them." In other words, God gave the Sanhedrin the authority and to announce and sanctify the new moon to the people. Its proclamation on earth was supported by God in heaven. Matthew 18:18-20 talks about that. As soon as the new moon was announced, well, then the first day of the month began. Excuse me. Once the beginning of the new moon month was established, the festivals and the weekly Shabbats for the upcoming month were sanctified for observance. In Hebrew, those observances have always been called appointed times. The word we use is Moedim in Hebrew, literally a sacred and set time. From God's perspective, the appointed times belong to Him, and no one has the authority to change the celebration of an appointed time. To do so was a serious matter and great sin. Appointed times had to be kept because of their messianic implications. Further, in Leviticus 23:4, notice the phrase holy convocation. The phrase in Hebrew for that is Mikra Kodesh. Better translated, holy convocation and rehearsal. Wow. In other words, God's appointed times are actually holy rehearsals set apart to reflect events in the Messianic era. God said to the people, pay attention. On this day, I'm going to do something. Wake up! The Jews were to know and practice all of God's mikraot, or holy convocations. This is the essence of Rav Shaul's words in Colossians 2:17, that the Shabbat, the new moon, and the festivals are a shadow of things to come, the body of Mashiach. Well, wow, twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, there are several appointed times. And specific days of holy convocation dedicated to the Lord. The new moon was the key in being able to fulfill these set times, convocations, and rehearsals. So when the new moon was announced on the first day of Nisan, which we also call Aviv, or we call it the first month, we have different names for these months. The people knew when to observe the holy convocations. And once they knew that, they could set the times for the 10th, the 14th and 15th, and the 16th, and finally the 21st. Those are all important days in the book of Exodus. In the same way, when the new moon was announced on the first day of Tishrei in the 7th month, that month is also called Ethanim, or the 7th month. The people knew when to observe the holy convocations of the 1st, the 10th, that's the 10th, the 15th, and the 22nd. Thus, from the announcement of the new moon to the festival dates which followed, it was only a matter of counting the right number of days. So we'll see how that applies to Yeshua's phrase in a little bit. The Mishnah is the rabbi's commentary. Also, we refer to it as the oral law, part of the Talmud now, dealt with the legal elements of daily Jewish religious life. In Hebrew, we call those elements halakha. Halakha is from the verb halak, which means to walk. So this would be the way you walk, the way you're made up, the rules that you follow, the laws that you have, the way you are. So in Israel, the high court, the court system, the legal system is called the halakha. So that's the way you are, the way you walk. In the treasure of 1st and 2nd century halakha, we find many explanations to help us understand the Torah, particularly in Yeshua's day, since he didn't have any Bibles then, so everything was oral. Nobody carried around those big rocks full of words. They had maybe scrolls, but still, that was kind of cumbersome to carry around. Nowadays, we have Kindles. In volume, we can call them moed, or festivals. Those are those holy days. Tractate, one of the tractates of this Mishnah is Rosh Hashanah. It's named that. And it teaches us about the Sanhedrin. It teaches us about the selection process for the 2 witnesses who would tell us when the new moon arrived. If you know anything about Deuteronomy 19:15, it says you got to have 2 or 3 witnesses for all decisions. So the Sanhedrin discussed when to proclaim the new moon, so they had to use 2 witnesses to figure it out. That's the element of all legal transactions in Judaism. The men were important because by their witness, Israel celebrated God's appointed times. These were important guys. They had to be of good character. They were always treated with great honor. You're not going to have them just show up. They had special privileges, such as an authorization to ride into Jerusalem on horseback on the Shabbat to bring the good news of the new moon festival. The men had special status because they were the confirmation that Israel depended on for the correct timing of the new month and the festivals. Let me read to you from the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, a couple things here. One's from 5 and one's from 6. There was a large court in Jerusalem called Beth Yaazek. There, all the witnesses used to assemble, and the Beit Din, that's the 3 judges that were over all the other judges, used to examine them. They used to entertain them lavishly. Wow. So these guys had plenty of good time there so that they would have an inducement to come. You know, you're not going to have a meeting unless you offer food. We used to have oneg at Adat, but, you know, COVID took care of that. The witnesses were allowed to break the Shabbat travel restrictions for this one purpose, lest they might be reluctant to come and give the essential evidence of the sighting of the new moon. And then in chapter 6, Mishnah 6, chapter 2, how do they test the witnesses? Well, this is how they do it. The pair who arrived first, so the ones who got there first, were tested first. Senior of them is brought in, and they say to him, tell us how you saw the moon, in front of the sun or behind the sun, to the north of it or to the south of it. How big was it? In which direction was it inclined? How broad was it? If he says he saw it in the front of the sun, his evidence was rejected. After that, they would bring in the second guy and test him. If their accounts were the same, they tallied, their evidence was accepted, and the other pairs were also questioned briefly, but not because they were required, but so that they wouldn't be disappointed. And, you know, we want them to keep coming back and doing this for us. So we wanted them to feel important, right? In qualifying the witnesses, the Sanhedrin used the following criteria. They never came at the same time. They were never questioned at the same time. And there were always two new ones each month. So in short, the two qualified witnesses stood before the Nasi. The Nasi was the head of the Sanhedrin, the president or the chief of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court. Usually it was the high priest, to give account of the moon's appearance prior to its becoming totally dark. Just before the moon's disk enters total darkness, there are tiny slivers of white on the edges of the waning disk. And those disks, those slivers are called the horns of the moon. So correctly sighting the horns on the waning crescent determined the beginning of the new month. Once the two witnesses were qualified and questioned, if the president, who had knowledge of astronomy himself, was convinced their observation was accurate, he publicly sanctified the start of the new month. After careful scrutiny to determine the official arrival of the new month, the Nasi, or president of the Sanhedrin, I don't have one of them hammers, proclaimed Rosh Chodesh with these words, sanctified, and all the people that were around him yelled, sanctified, sanctified. So everybody's running around yelling, sanctified, sanctified. Go ahead, try this at home. Sanctified, sanctified. After the proclamation, the Sanhedrin ordered watchmen on the nearby hills to light fires, to signal, to inform the Jews in all of Judah and Shomron, Samaria, and Egypt and Babylon and the Galut. There's a lot of fires that went on that night. The new month had begun. So 12 times a year, you're having big fires everywhere. They started the Festival of the New Moon and the counting of the next, get this, 29 and a half days to the next new moon month proclamation. Yeah, the moon rotates around the earth 29 and a half days each time, which makes it very difficult because how do you keep your calendar? Well, the Jews do it this way. The first month is 29 days long. The second month is 30 days long. Third month is 29 days long. And fourth month is 30 days long. So it balances it out all year. And then every 7 times in every 19-year cycle, they have what they call a leap year. And in a leap year, because they get out of date, the moon with the sun, they have to add an extra month. So they do a 13th month, which they call Adar, which is the 12th month of the year. Adar 2, the sequel. Okay? Just like see in Star Wars or any other movie, there's always a sequel. Once again, the Sanhedrin set Rosh Chodesh, or the beginning of the new month, by citing the new moon. The rest of the festivals were calculated after that. However, the 7th month, Tishrei, was particularly important because it was the only month that had a holy convocation or appointed time on the first day of the month. That's a problem. That was a unique problem. The first day of Tishrei was the appointed time we call the Festival of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, or Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. Yet, no one could begin observing the festival until they heard those famous words from the president of the Sanhedrin. Y'all can say it now: sanctified, sanctified. Right? If they didn't hear that, no one in Israel could ever even plan for the first day of the 7th month. When they knew how many days to count for a festival, well, then it got easy. But how could they plan for a festival? They did not know what day or hour it would be publicly announced and thus begin. This was unique to Yom Teruah and dependent upon the testimony of the 2 witnesses and the proclamation of the Sanhedrin's president, sanctified. Of course, anyone could look up into the twilight or early morning sky. You all can do that at home. And if they looked hard enough, they'd see the new moon. You could even see its horns. Go out there Friday night and look. And certainly an astute observer knew about the 29 and a half days were completed since the previous Rosh Chodesh. But recall, only the Sanhedrin Nasi, the leader, had the authority to proclaim the first day of Tishrei, which was already established as a technical procedure. Once proclaimed, the Feast of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah, commenced. Until that public announcement by the Nasi, everyone had to wait before they could begin the observance of the festival. No one could start the festival ahead of its time. Wow. So how does this explanation apply to the words of Yeshua? Like all other people of his day, guess what? He could not know the day or the hour to begin the Feast of Trumpets. From his viewpoint, he, of course, understood future events as seen in his words of Matthew 24:25, and no doubt knew not only on what day the new moon would be announced, but probably at what precise minute it would be announced. He probably had it all down. But that did not matter because he was not a member of the Sanhedrin, nor was he the Nasi. Therefore, Yeshua had no authority to interview the 2 witnesses or proclaim the start of the Feast of Trumpets. From that perspective, he, like everyone else, had to wait for the public declaration of the new moon by the proper officials. When you understand that in its first century Jewish context, the surrounding verse of Matthew 24:36 makes perfect sense. Yeshua clearly makes a messianic age statement by using a figure of speech understood by Yerushalmites preparing to celebrate the Feast of Trumpets. With so many factors determining the holy day, it was indeed from everyone's vantage point, including Yeshua and his Talmudim, his disciples, a day and an hour no man knows, not even the Son. Now the new moon is not confirmed by 2 witnesses, nor is it proclaimed by Jerusalem Sanhedrin, although there is one now. It is mathematically calculated and has been since the mid-4th century CE. But I believe Yeshua's words in Matthew 24:36 will be fulfilled moments before the heavenly shofar announces the resurrection, the rapture, and the day of the Lord. And why do I say that? Well, the 2 witnesses appointed to confirm the Rosh Hashanah new moon day of the Lord will be Eliyahu, Elijah, and Moses, Moshe. How do I know that? The rabbis tell me. It's in their Midrash Rabbah. Let me read to you some of that. Another explanation, who the 2 tables? Why 2? The rabbis say the Holy One, blessed be he, said, These shall act as witnesses between me and my children. They correspond to two witnesses that must testify to a cause, to two groomsmen, to bridegroom and bride, to heaven and earth, to this world and the world to come. And then on the other part it says, Moses, I swear to you, as you devoted your life to their service in this world, so too in the time to come, when I bring Elijah the prophet onto them, the two of you shall come together. So those are the two witnesses. So Yeshua is the Nasi. He is the president of the heavenly Sanhedrin. And he has the Father's authority to proclaim the Feast of Trumpets on the day of the Lord. The context of Matthew 24 concerns the tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, Yaakov's trouble, we call it in Hebrew, the millennium, and the day of the Lord. In light of this, was Yeshua acting out of character by embedding a unique figure of speech halfway through his discourse? No. He actually makes use of them quite frequently throughout this chapter 24. Let me give you some verses you could look up while you're bored. 27, 28, 32, 45, 51. You can look those up and see some other things, figures of speech. Why did Yeshua use figures of speech concerning the end times? Why shouldn't he just say it plainly? Perhaps because a figure of speech is a good way of making a point stick. In his day, memorization was the rule. They didn't have books. It was not the exception, the rule. You had to memorize things. And people today in the field of memorization will tell you that word pictures help you to remember. That is precisely what Yeshua did in Matthew 24, using lightning, using vultures, fig trees, servants, hypocrites, and images of the new moon being announced by the Sanhedrin. Yeshua painted pictures with Jewish concepts grounded in the Torah, and Matthew 24:36 was no exception. That's it. So let me give you some other stuff about Matthew 24:36. We'll start with Matthew 24:42. Some confusing end times passages here. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. So this passage is a rebuke and an exhortation by Yeshua to those who miss the resurrection and rapture and have to face 7 years of Yaakov's trouble, Jacob's trouble. It is a warning to keep watch for his physical return at the end of the period. Why a rebuke? Because these people do not know on what day the Lord will come. This is to their shame. Having a spiritually lazy attitude during the tribulation could lead one into unpreparedness, which will result in being taken away with the wicked on the day of judgment. Do not confuse this passage with Matthew 24:36 and the proclamation of the Rosh Hashanah new moon prior to the resurrection and rapture. In the Talmud, there is an interesting comment made by Rabbi Zera, who was in support of calculating the coming of Mashiach. He said, whenever he chanced upon scholars engaged thereon, i.e. calculating the time of Messiah's coming, he said, I beg of you, do not postpone it, for it has been taught, 3 come unawares, Messiah, a found article, and a scorpion. Those are the 3 things that show up unaware. In other words, you should look, study, and maintain a constant vigil, because if you're not prepared, his coming will catch you unaware, even as one finds a long-lost article or is surprised by a scorpion. These things should not be. Pay attention. Look out for that long-lost article. And while you're out hiking, watch out for scorpions. Matthew 25:13 says, therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. In context, Yeshua is telling here another wedding story, and again is reproving his listeners, exhorting them to pay attention to the festival of the first day of the 7th month. Remember some of its themes. Among others, it deals with a wedding celebration and a marriage. Also notice in context in 25:10, it says, that while the virgins, were on their way to buy the oil, distracted with other means because they were not prepared, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Wow. Again, anytime you see an open door linked to the end times, it's Jewish terminology for Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah. In this case, the door is shut, which means Rosh Hashanah has ended. The groom has come for his bride, and Yom Kippur, which is symbolized by a closed door, follows next. Mark 13:32. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. So the context there is the tribulation, the fig tree, and a doorkeeper. Wow. In Mark's narrative, Yeshua is again using word pictures of a door and his doorkeeper with a warning that we should pay attention to that time. Both the NIV and the King James Version, the KJV, translators missed that concept, but the New American Standard, NASB, understood that. They put italics, the word appointed in italics before the word time. This was very insightful on their part. In Judaism, there are 7 appointed times on the Jewish calendar. This one in Mark 13 points to the Feast of Trumpets as seen through the terminology. Another intriguing phrase Yeshua uses in Mark 13:32 is be on guard, be alert. His Jewish audience certainly understood he was referring to the temple guard. According to Mishnah Tractate Midoth, Mishnah 2, and Talmud Tractate Talmud 28a, a priest on guard duty was to be alert and watching for the chief of the guard, who came around on each watch, looking to see if the one on duty was awake or asleep. Well, let's read that. The officer on the Temple Mount used to go round to every watch with torches burning before him, and if any watchman did not rise and say, "Officer, I greet you," it was proof that he was sleeping, and he would beat him with a stick. Wow. He was also permitted to burn his clothes. And the others would say, "What noise is that in the Azarah?" It is the cry of a Levite who is being beaten and whose garments are being burnt because he was asleep at his post. Man, don't ever. I used to be on guard duty in the military, and we used to guard airplanes that had nuclear bombs on them. And I used to guard missile sites that had nuclear bombs in them. And I was not allowed to fall asleep. But if I did, man, we would be in trouble, or I would have been in trouble. They didn't burn my clothes, though. They probably would have beat me with something. Anyway, I didn't fall asleep, so it didn't happen. This should bring to mind a passage, though, out of Revelation, which was the Lord saying to those who are not paying attention and looking for his coming. Revelation 16:15 says, "Behold, I come like a thief. Blessed is he who stays awake and keeps his clothes with him, so that he may not go naked and be shamefully exposed." Wow, that's what happens to priests. Therefore, Yeshua in Mark 13:32 is clearly connecting those who might otherwise think they could get away with having a slothful attitude towards his coming. And when will he come for his bride and begin his reign as Israel's king? Are you very slothful? You need to unsloth yourself. He has already given us specific clues. Well, today is the Festival of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah. There's going to be a rapture. If it happens this week, it'll probably be around 4 p.m. Omaha time, because has to be done at a certain time. The year, well, the rabbis say this next year starting we're in 5780 right now, and on Saturday we start 5781 on the Jewish civil calendar. And the rabbis, but I understand they've made a calculated error. And I've heard a lot of things about calendars, but the year we're looking for him to come back is the year 6001. and that's on the Jewish calendar. And the time will be Israel Standard Time at midnight. So that's why I said 4 p.m. Omaha time. With so many hints, there should be no excuse. You better be ready. Get your bags packed Friday morning. We have all that we need to determine when he will arrive. So all we got to do is watch and wait. Don't fall asleep. Don't burn your clothes. Don't get beaten by a stick. Do all those things. Luke 12, 39 and 40. But understand this. If the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house to be broken into. You must also be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. The moral of the story, then, is to know when the thief is coming. Doing so gives the owner of the house a distinct advantage over the one who does not know when the thief is coming. Similarly, those facing the tribulation in the day of the Lord are to know at what appointed time Yeshua is coming. This applies to believers on this side of the resurrection and rapture, and to those who become believers during the tribulation in the day of the Lord. If we do not know and understand the appointed time, it is to our shame. Acts 1:7, he said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority." That passage is misunderstood by nearly everyone who tries to link it with 24:36 and other scriptures dealing with resurrection, rapture, and the second coming of Mashiach. Acts chapter 1, 6 and 7 concern the regathering of the 10 tribes of Israel that are missing. I don't want to say they're lost. This is learned when you understand the Jewish term restoring the kingdom to Israel. All right, so I think I've said enough about all this. Let's summarize everything. No man knows the day or the hour, right? The first day of the 7th month, the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, was an appointed time, according to Moshe in the Torah. Its themes are repentance, marriage, a wedding feast, coronation, and kingship. The new moon is a Jewish calendar in the sky. 12 times a year, 2 witnesses came to the Jewish court in Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin, to announce the new moon, which set the festivals for the coming month. The only festival not set was the first day of the 7th month. Public announcement of the new moon by the president of the Sanhedrin commenced festivities on the first day of the 7th month. No person outside of the Nasi, the Sanhedrin president, could know the day and hour of the Rosh Hashanah festival. Yeshua's words, "No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father," is a Hebrew expression for the holy convocation of Yom Teruah, the first day of the 7th month. We are to watch and pray for that day and that hour, anxiously awaiting the resurrection of the dead, the rapture, and the completion of our redemption. And I thank you all for listening. Hope you have a glorious day. Blessings to you all. Shalom.